The year is 1588. The Spanish Armada, the most formidable naval force the world had ever seen, sails toward the English Channel. This is the moment of Spain's absolute zenith, the climax of an empire built on gold, silver, and the iron will of its Catholic monarchs. Spain, under King Philip II, is not just a nation, it is a global superpower, our sprawling dominion that stretches from the sun-baked plains of Castile to the silver mines of Potosi, from the bustling ports of Manila to the battlefields of Flanders. The sun, quite literally, never sets on the Spanish Empire. Yet, beneath this glittering facade of power and piety, a fatal flaw was already gnawing at the foundations of the empire. The very source of its strength, the endless torrent of silver from the New World, was also the engine of its destruction. This is the story of how Spain, the richest, most powerful nation on earth, went from an unparalleled global empire to financial ruin in less than 50 years. It is a cautionary tale of economic hubris, the curse of easy money, and the devastating cost of constant war. To understand the collapse, we must first appreciate the scale of the wealth. From the mid-16th century onward, fleets of galleons, laden with tons of silver from the mines of Zacatecas and Potosi, crossed the Atlantic. This treasure, the Quinto Real, was the lifeblood of the Spanish crown. It was not seen as capital to be invested in productive capacity, in factories, infrastructure, or a robust domestic economy, but as a limitless war chest. Philip II inherited a vast but financially strained empire from his father, Charles V. Charles V had been a man of endless ambition, constantly at war with France, the Ottoman Empire, and the Protestant princes of Germany. He financed these conflicts by borrowing heavily from European bankers, primarily the Fuggers of Augsburg. By the time Philip II took the throne in 1556, the debt was staggering. The first blow came almost immediately. In 1557, just 1 year into his reign, Philip II was forced to declare the first of many state bankruptcies. The crown defaulted on its loans, causing a massive financial shockwave across Europe. This first bankruptcy was a clear warning, but Philip II did not heed it. He was a monarch driven by two obsessions: maintaining the Catholic faith as the dominant power in Europe and suppressing the Dutch revolt in the Netherlands. Both were incredibly expensive. The war in the Netherlands in particular became a financial black hole. Spanish troops, the legendary Tercio, were the best in the world, but they demanded payment. When the silver fleets were delayed, or the crown's finances were stretched, the soldiers mutinied, often sacking the very cities they were supposed to be defending, such as the infamous Spanish Fury in Antwerp in 1576. The flow of silver, rather than solving the problem, exacerbated it. The sheer volume of precious metal entering Spain caused massive inflation, a phenomenon known as the price revolution. Spanish goods became prohibitively expensive compared to those produced in England, France, and the Netherlands. The Spanish crown, instead of buying from its own people, found it cheaper to import everything, food, clothing, and even military supplies, from its rivals. This was the ultimate economic paradox. The richest nation in the world was exporting its wealth to its enemies, effectively deindustrializing itself. The 1588 Armada campaign was the ultimate gamble, a desperate attempt to end the English and Dutch threats in one decisive stroke. Its failure was not just a military defeat, it was a financial catastrophe. The cost of building and outfitting the invincible fleet was astronomical, and its destruction meant that the investment was a total loss. This defeat, combined with the ongoing drain of the Dutch War, pushed Spain toward its second and third bankruptcies in 1575 and 1596. By the turn of the 17th century, the golden age of Spain was already tarnished. Philip III, who succeeded his father in 1598, inherited a kingdom that was exhausted, indebted, and increasingly reliant on a single volatile source of income. The new century brought a brief period of peace with the signing of the Treaty of London with England in 1604 and the 12 years' truce with the Dutch in 1609. But the structural economic problems remained unsolved. The Spanish nobility, obsessed with honor and disdainful of commerce, continued to live lavishly, while the productive classes, The merchants, artisans, and farmers were crushed by exorbitant taxes. The expulsion of the Moriscos in 1609, though religiously motivated, was an economic disaster, removing hundreds of thousands of skilled agricultural workers and artisans from the economy. The peace was short-lived. In 1618, the 30 Years' War erupted in Central Europe, and Spain, bound by dynastic ties to the Austrian Habsburgs and its own imperial ambitions, was dragged back into a continent-wide conflict. This war, coupled with the renewal of the war against the Dutch in 1621, marked the final, fatal chapter of Spain's decline. The cost of maintaining armies across Europe, from the Rhineland to Italy, was simply unsustainable. The reign of Philip IV, which began in 1621, was dominated by the figure of his chief minister, the Count Duke of Olivares. Olivares was a man of immense vision and energy who recognized the need for fundamental reform. He proposed the Union of Arms, a plan to distribute the financial and military burden of the empire more equitably among all its territories. But his reforms were too little, too late, and met with fierce resistance from the regional elites who guarded their ancient privileges. The 1620s and 1630s saw Spain engaged in a desperate, multi-front struggle for survival. The silver fleets, though still arriving, were increasingly intercepted by Dutch and English privateers. The most devastating loss came in 1628, when the entire Spanish treasure fleet was captured by the Dutch Admiral Piet Hein in the Battle of the Bay of Matanzas. This single event was a financial and psychological blow from which the crown never truly recovered. It led directly to the bankruptcy of 1627, followed by another in 1647. The relentless pressure of war and taxation finally broke the kingdom. In 1640, both Catalonia and Portugal revolted. The Portuguese, tired of Spanish rule and eager to reclaim their independence and their own colonial empire, succeeded. The loss of Portugal, a major blow to Spanish prestige and power, signaled to the world that the empire was fracturing. The final symbolic defeat came in 1643 at the Battle of Rocroi, where the legendary Spanish tercios were decisively beaten by the French army. Rocroi is often cited as the end of Spanish military dominance in Europe. The subsequent Treaty of Westphalia in 1648 and the Treaty of the Pyrenees in 1659 confirmed Spain's new status as a secondary power. The empire was still vast, but its core, Castile, was depopulated, its economy was in ruins, and its government was paralyzed by debt and internal strife. The 50-year period from the late 16th century to the mid-17th century was a rapid, agonizing descent. It was a transition from the hubris of the invincible Armada to the humiliation of Rocroi, from the world's greatest creditor to a serial defaulter. Spain's tragedy was not a lack of resources, but a failure of economic philosophy. They mistook silver for wealth and military might for economic stability. They spent their treasure on maintaining a glorious past, while their rivals, the Dutch and the English, were quietly building the foundations of a modern commercial future. The empire survived, but the superpower was gone, bankrupted by its own gold. The final lesson of Spain's 50-year collapse is that true power is not measured by the size of your gold reserves, but by the strength of your productive economy. When the silver ran low, Spain had nothing left to sell but its pride, and that too was eventually repossessed. The economic mechanism of Spain's self-destruction is a fascinating and tragic study in unintended consequences. The massive influx of New World silver, instead of enriching the nation, acted as a poison. This phenomenon, the Kai's price revolution, saw prices in Spain rise far faster than in the rest of Europe. By the early 17th century, Spanish goods were, on average, 40% more expensive than their foreign counterparts. This hyperinflation had a devastating effect on the nascent Spanish manufacturing sector. Why would a Castilian merchant buy expensive Spanish textiles when cheaper, higher quality cloth could be imported from England or the Netherlands? The Crown, desperate for revenue to fund its wars, compounded the problem by imposing heavy taxes on domestic production and trade, while the silver, which should have been invested, was instead used to pay for foreign imports and foreign wars. Spain was effectively subsidizing the industrial growth of its rivals. The Crown's relationship with its bankers was another critical failure. The Spanish monarchy did not borrow money in the modern sense. It relied on a system of short-term, high-interest loans known as asientos. These were essentially contracts with powerful banking houses like the Genoese, who would advance cash to the Crown in exchange for future revenue streams, often the silver shipments from the Americas. When the Crown declared bankruptcy, as it did in 1557, 1575, 1596, 1607, 1627, 1647, and 1652, it was not a simple default. It was a forced conversion of these short-term high-interest asientos into long-term low-interest government bonds, known as juros. This move temporarily relieved the Crown's immediate cash crunch, but it destroyed the Crown's creditworthiness. Each bankruptcy made the next loan more expensive, as bankers demanded higher interest rates to compensate for the increased risk. It was a vicious cycle. War led to debt, debt led to bankruptcy, bankruptcy led to higher interest rates, and higher interest rates meant the Crown needed even more silver to service its debt, leading to more war to secure the silver. The social structure of Spain was equally ill-suited to economic modernity. The Spanish nobility, the hidalgos, considered manual labor and commerce beneath them. Their highest aspiration was military service or a position in the church or the royal bureaucracy. This cultural disdain for productive work meant that the entrepreneurial spirit, which was fueling the rise of the Dutch and the English middle classes, was stifled in Spain. The most talented and ambitious people were drawn into the non-productive sectors of the economy. Furthermore, the church held vast untaxed wealth and land, further shrinking the tax base. The expulsion of the Moriscos in 1609, driven by religious intolerance, was a self-inflicted wound. These were not just people, they were the backbone of Spanish agriculture, particularly in Valencia and Aragon, known for their irrigation techniques and skilled farming. Their removal led to a collapse in agricultural output and a further drain on the national economy. The reign of Philip IV and the administration of the Count Duke of Olivares represent the last desperate attempt to reverse the tide. Olivares was a true statesman who understood the gravity of the situation. His grand memorial of 1624 laid out a stark vision. "The king, your majesty, has one thing to fix, that you should be king of Spain, and not just of Portugal, Aragon, Valencia, and Catalonia." He sought to unify the disparate kingdoms of Spain into a single centralized state, sharing the burdens of empire. His Union of Arms was designed to create a standing reserve army of 140 Hohenzollern men, with each region contributing men and money proportionally. This was a direct challenge to the ancient privileges of the regional kingdoms, who saw it as an attack on their autonomy. The resistance was immediate and fierce. The breaking point came in 1640. The pressure of the 30 Years' War, the massive taxation, and the heavy-handed attempts by Olivares to enforce the Union of Arms led to simultaneous revolts in Catalonia and Portugal. The Portuguese Restoration War was a long, costly failure. The loss of Portugal, which had been under Spanish rule since 1580, meant the loss of its vast colonial empire, including Brazil, and a significant blow to Spain's global reach. The military defeat at Rocroi in 1643 was more than a battle lost. It was a paradigm shift. The French army, under the young Duke of Enghien, shattered the myth of the invincibility of the Spanish tercios. It was a symbolic end to Spain's military dominance in Europe. Olivares was dismissed shortly after, his grand vision of a reformed, unified Spain in ruins. The period from the 1590s to the 1640s, a span of 50 years, saw the Spanish Empire transition from the master of Europe to a state of perpetual crisis. The empire was not physically conquered, but it was economically suffocated. The silver intended to buy power instead bought inflation, debt, and the neglect of the domestic economy. The constant need for cash forced the crown into a Faustian bargain with foreign bankers, leading to a cycle of default that eroded its financial standing. In the end, Spain's decline was a failure of governance and economic philosophy. The empire had the resources, but it lacked the institutions and the cultural mindset to convert that raw wealth into sustainable power. It is a powerful historical reminder that an empire built on the extraction of finite resources, without a foundation of productive industry and sound fiscal management, is destined to crumble, no matter how much gold flows into its coffers. The story of Spain's 50-year descent is a timeless lesson in the difference between being rich and being wealthy. The former is temporary, the latter is built to last. The true tragedy is that the Spanish crown, blinded by the glory of its past and the immediate needs of its wars, consistently chose the path of short-term financial fixes over long-term structural reform. They were the first global empire to learn the hard way that a nation cannot spend its way to prosperity, especially when the money it is spending is simultaneously destroying its own economy. The bankruptcies were not the cause of the decline. They were the symptom of a deeper, fatal disease, the inability to adapt to the changing economic realities of the modern world.